Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today I'm going to be discussing a relatively new feature within Snap XMP called connectors. For some of you, I would imagine this feature will fit in with many of the projects that you're currently doing, and as such I hope this session will prove very useful to you. For others, it might not be something you're currently engaging in, but I do hope it will give you some food for thought and perhaps open up some opportunities for you in the future. So first off, what is a connector? Put very simply, it's a way of connecting surveys, and in particular, we're talking about connecting of data. When a questionnaire or form is completed, its data is transferred across to another survey project. Some of you may be doing some connecting or merging of data already, but this is likely to be merging of data together from a number of different surveys ready for analysis. So perhaps you might have a few different surveys, maybe this year's survey, last year's survey, and you want to merge it into one survey ready for analysis. And typically you would use a database link to perform this action. Connectors, though, is about taking the data from one questionnaire or form and then using that data to create a participant list in another survey. Some example uses of how we might do this could be simply using it as a way of creating a mailing list, perhaps training feedback follow-ups, or ongoing surveys and trials, and also 360 surveys. So let's have a look at these in a bit more detail. So in terms of forming mailing lists, you might have a simple form on your website where people can sign up to take part in future surveys. On pressing submit on that form, their details would be added to a future survey. Training feedback follow-ups. If you're running training courses or events, then it's likely you're going to have a feedback form. It may be that you then want to follow this up a few weeks later to see how your attendees are getting on further down the line. And I actually use this in my job role, sort of in the training department at Snap. So after the training session, the delegates are invited to complete our evaluation survey. As part of that, they can opt into a follow-up survey with an extra incentive of being entered into a prize draw for some free training. And then having completed that first survey, 8 weeks later, we then follow that up with a follow-on survey. So that's automatically sent out to them. Once that's then completed, we're then able to compare how people felt straight after the training course versus how they felt having gone back to the office into the real world and actually tried to put into practice everything they'd learned. And in that example, or in this example, not only is it the participant mailing details which are being added up to the follow-on survey, but also some of the actual completed responses. And this then allows us to see previous answers into the follow-on questionnaire, which helps to remind participants what they perhaps said when they initially filled it out straight after the training session. Ongoing trials and product testing. So a combination of the two previous examples, really. Someone would initially sign up for a product trial via a form. Their details would get added to an initial questionnaire to do some reviews. Once that initial questionnaire is submitted, their details are then automatically added to the mailing list for the next wave of testing, which perhaps might take place a few weeks later. Again, in this example, it's quite likely that the respondent data would also be connected to those follow-on questionnaires. And then the last example, 360 surveys. So this is where an employee is rated or reviewed by a number of different people. So rather than it just being a two-way review between perhaps an employee and perhaps a manager, here an individual might be reviewed by 3 or 4 more colleagues, perhaps clients, suppliers, managers, or anyone else that just might work alongside or with that individual. Okay, let's head into the software and have a look at how the connectors are going to work in action. So we're going to start by looking at the survey in Snap Desktop. And in my first example, I'm going to be using 3 different surveys today, but in my first example, I've got a mailing sign-up survey. So this is the initial survey we're talking about, which we sort of call a source survey. So if I go into that initial survey, so fairly simple survey. So this one's asking people to sort of add their details in terms of how to sign up. So add in first name, last name, email address. Nothing really too exciting going on. The only thing I've really done is if I right click on the email address question and go to variable properties, I have added a email pattern just to make sure that when they input an email address, it's a valid email address, or at least everything a valid email address needs. And the other thing is, because this is, I mean, it is a survey, but really it's a form. Rather than it being a submit button at the end, I'm asking people to press the register button. So under questionnaire properties and under buttons, and said rather than it being a sort of more traditional submit button, I've just overtyped the text and made it a register button. If you're going to do that, just be careful also to make sure that you also update the alt text, which is the hover sort of pop-up text, which would be used by anyone that's using a sort of text reader that reads out loud to them. Okay. But apart from that, just really simple survey. If we look at the questionnaire in Snap Online, so that's my initial mailing sign up. And we're going to collect. The only thing different in here is the fact that we've actually started it. So it's a live survey as we speak. If I now look at the follow-on survey, so again, I'm actually going to pop back into Snap Desktop. So my follow-on survey is the actual tell us about yourself. So that's a sort of an actual follow-on questionnaire, the fact that they've signed up and then they're going to be completing this survey. And again, I've added some extra text at the end just to try and make it a bit more obvious what's happening today, but this is what we would call the destination survey. So I go into that survey. So first of all, we've got a number of hidden questions at the top of the page. And I'll just right click on show you those ones. So these relate back to the original sort of sign up questionnaire. So the first name, last name and email address, but they don't need to be seen by the person filling in the survey, so they're hidden. So the data from that first survey is going to be seeded into the second survey. But what I've done, I've made use of that then by personalizing the introduction by adding their first name. So it's going to say, hi, Bob, hi, John, etc., etc. Again, apart from that, it's a fairly straightforward survey. If we move into Snap Online to look at that survey. So again, it is a started survey. But the difference with this one is that we have some participants. Go into my participant list. And we've also got our connectors, which we'll look at in just a second. Now you'll notice that there is actually someone already in this participant list, and actually it's me. I'm on here as a sort of a dummy participant at the moment, and this is actually needed to allow me to set up the structure of any sort of future participants. And the way I've added this person, this sort of dummy person on there, is to effectively upload an Excel spreadsheet. So I'll take you through that in just a moment, but just before we do that, I will actually just quickly show you the spreadsheet. So on my desktop, I've got my Excel spreadsheet. And again, really simple. It's just relating back to the questions that I had in that initial survey. So first name, last name, email. The other thing we have is a personal identifier, so some kind of unique ID. So again, this is just my sort of dummy details because we need to initially upload a spreadsheet to Snap Online just to set the structure of the different sort of columns of data in the background. So I'll close that one down. Head back into Snap Online. So as I said, initially when you come to here, there won't be that dummy person there, so you would need to upload some participants. Now I am going to fly through this very, very quickly. There is actually a webinar I did a few months back, which I'm going to be pointing you to at the end. So yeah, I'm not going to spend too long kind of going into the ins and outs of what I'm doing here, but ultimately you're going to add some new participants, point off to my spreadsheet. So in my spreadsheet, I've got an email column, so that's how Snap is going to know who to email. As I said, it has a unique identifier, that ID column, and today we're going to be seeding data into the invitation, so we can say, dear Bob, dear John, and we're also going to seed that data from that initial data, the initial sort of form with their name, email address, and first name and last name. So for the invitation, we're going to seed in their first name. So this is just pointing off to the columns in my spreadsheet. For the actual questionnaire, we've got those hidden questions at the top of this survey, and they're going to be seeded again by the columns in the spreadsheet. So I'm not going to worry about uploading because I've obviously already done that, so I'll just cancel out there. So that's the participant list. If we also have a quick look at the invitation that's going to be sent out to people. So I'm just going to pause this invitation just so I can edit this and show you sort of what's going on in the background. So I have, again, my personalized invitation, including the first name. I then have the link for the survey, and this survey is actually, or this invitation, set to go out 7 days after they get added to the participant list. So if a person gets added today, there you will get their invitation in 7 days. If a person gets added in another 3 days time, it will effectively be in 10 days from today. So it's always the number of days from when they get added to the participant list. And you can have a number of different invitations and reminders, but yeah, today we'll leave it at that. If we then look at the connectors, so I've got a couple of connectors set up here today. So I've got one which is going to be used to add people to our mailing list, and also another one which is going to be used to remove people from the mailing list. So look at editing the first one, so that adding to the mailing list. Again, I'm going to move through this fairly quickly, but I will point you off to the support files on this at the end of the day. So I've given it a name of add to mailing list. We're going to add people, participants. We're pointing off to my initial survey, that one I showed you earlier. So these are surveys in my account. You can also search for surveys which have been shared by you as well, or shared with you. And it's a very similar process to uploading your Excel spreadsheet of the participants, but here we're pointing off to that initial survey. So in the initial survey, the email address question is question 1C, and I'm going to use the email address also for my unique ID. And again, we're still seeding data into the invitation and the questionnaire itself. Again, that's where it's going to get the information from that first survey for the first name, for the invitation, and for the first name, last name, and email address. Again, it's pointing off to my various questions in that initial survey. I update that. As I said, I've actually got a remove one, so again, I'll very quickly point at that one. So for the remove, obviously a different name, but this one is all about deleting people or deleting participants. This time pointing off to a different survey. So I've got actually 2 initial surveys, one which adds people and one which removes people. Okay. Again, just making sure we're pointing off to the correct questions. And we don't have to say which questions we're sort of seeding data in, because we're not seeding people, we're effectively removing people from the mailing list. So it makes no sense to attempt to seed data at the same time. Okay, so that's how we set things up. Let's now have a look at how this all works in real life. So at the moment, as I said, my participant list just has my sort of dummy account on there, or my dummy participant, which is me. It could be anyone. I'm going to open up, I've got the mailing sign up survey, and I've also got the removal survey. So if I open up the mail up sign up survey, as I said, this could just be a form on your website. It could be a form you email people, could be anywhere really. So that's some details in here. Okay, and as I said, it's the register rather than submit. I submit that one. So that's Tom Jerry setup. I'm now going to just add one more as well. Mr. Simpson. And I'll register that person as well. So if I now go back to my main survey, I just refresh the screen. We can see that as well as the dummy account, I now have Tom and Jerry and B Simpson. As I said, I have also got a removal tool. So we just run that one as well. This time doing the removal tool. So I guess this would be the equivalent of often at the bottom of emails, or maybe on your website, you have a sort of an unsubscribe button. So this is a kind of an unsubscribe survey. So sorry to hear that you're leaving. Tell us who you are. So I'm going to get rid of B Simpson. And often when you are sort of trying to take yourself off mailing list, they want to know why. So again, I've just added a couple of questions. So I don't know, perhaps emails aren't relevant to me, plus you send too many in the first place. And this time we've got the more sort of traditional submit button. And again, if I just refresh the screen, we can see that B Simpson has disappeared. Okay, so a quick recap of the key requirements here then. So if I just come back out of this window, back into my webinars folder. So we needed a source survey, which was the initial sort of sign up survey. And as I said, as you can see here, you can have as many different sign up surveys as you want, obviously potentially all doing different things. So in my case, signing up and also removing. You could also do an update as well. We need a destination survey, so basically a follow-on survey. So this is where the data from that source survey is going to be sent. We need that dummy participant spreadsheet. So as I said, for us to set up the structure of your participants in Snap Online, we need to upload at least one spreadsheet with at least one person on there, just so it knows that there's columns of data in the background. And finally, it's just worth pointing out that it's within the destination survey that we set up the connector. So the data is being pulled into the destination survey. It's not being pushed from the source survey into the destination survey. It's the other way around. So all the sort of work is set up in the destination, the follow-on survey. A couple of things just to be aware of. In my example, I was using their email address as that unique identifier, as the sort of personal identifier. This needs to be unique, as I said, meaning that if I was to attempt to add someone in with the same email address, it won't work because they've got the same personal identifier. If that happens, then an error will be shown within the connector, and I'll just show you that now. So I'm going to go back into the mailing sign up, and I'm going to add Tom Jerry again. Now, Tom Jerry is actually already on my spreadsheet, already on my participants. I've added Tom Jerry again. If I go back into my survey, still just got the two participants. If I go into my participants, once it wakes up, yeah, you can see that it realized Tom Joey was on there already, so it wasn't able to add them a second time because they had the same login essentially. And if I go to my connectors, you can see we have an error message here basically telling us that it's failed to add them because, yeah, that participant already had the same login details. So I can clear that one just to remove it. It's worth sort of just pointing out though that you don't have to clear them. You could just leave the errors sort of building up if you wanted to. It's not going to affect anything. The data is still going to carry on collecting other people's participant data. But yeah, it's just a way of trying to work out what's gone wrong. Now, I mentioned other examples earlier, my sort of training evaluation survey and follow-up survey, and also for sort of product testing and product trials. And they would work in exactly the same way. You'd have a series of different surveys with each subsequent survey connected to the previous one. That way, thinking about sort of the product testing, if a participant stops filling out one of the forms, as in maybe they start participating in the trial, they don't keep getting invited to the sort of follow-on trials as well. So yeah, if it's a 5-week trial with sort of 5 different forms being sent out week after week, there's no point sending sort of week 2, week 3, week 4 if they actually never have been filled in week 1. Okay. And I mentioned a moment ago about the personal identifiers needing to be unique. In the example of a training evaluation survey, it's quite likely that the same person might attend multiple courses over the year, and as such they would need to be added to this mailing list, this participant list, multiple times, because yeah, if I filled in completed a training course in January, you'd want to send me a survey, maybe a follow-up survey. If I then came back and joined a training course in April, you'd probably also want to send me another survey and again a follow-up survey. So I would need to be on this list twice, so using my email address isn't going to really work. So in this case, you'd need to think about using a different personal identifier. So again, I'm going to go back into Snap Desktop a second. So I've gone back into my initial mailing sign up. If I just save that a second and go into my data entry window. So one thing you could use instead of email address is perhaps id.case. Now that's a randomly generated series of letters and numbers. If you're fairly new to XMP, this wasn't available in our sort of older version of Snap. So yeah, that's a unique identifier which can be quite useful. As I said, it's just made up of randomly generated letters and numbers in a random order. What you might want to do though is actually create your own unique ID. And what you could do with that one is perhaps make use of some of these other system variables, so things like the date, the time, duration, etc., but perhaps to combine it with the email address, and that way it becomes a personal identifier which does also have some personal details in there as well, rather than just a randomly generated series of numbers and letters. Now, to do that, you would create a derived variable to sort of merge the data from Q1C with perhaps some of these other system variables. So I'm just going to very quickly show you how you would go about doing that. So if I close this window down and go into the variables window, I've got a derived variable called ID. Has a label and a name of ID and unique ID. It's a literal response derived variable, and it's taking its data from question 1C, which was the email address question. What's your email address question? Is adding it to id.date and id.start, which was the time, the date and the time that they started the questionnaire. So that sequence of email, date and time is going to be unique. Not sure if you can see it very well, but in between those different questions is a colon. Alternatively, you could use the word with. So yeah, if you were doing things like I said, product testing or training evaluation surveys where it's quite likely you're going to get the same people signing up over and over, you'd want to use something more like this rather than using an email address. I mentioned earlier that connectors could also be used in conjunction with group questionnaires for 360 surveys or reviews, which are all about individuals getting reviewed from different areas of the business. That's probably a good subject for another webinar though, on another day, so we're not going to go any further than that, but yeah, that connectors could certainly be useful for those 360 projects. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a few ideas of how connectors might be used for some of your future projects. Obviously, I have gone over some of that fairly quickly and haven't gone into all the ins and outs of the entire process. But on screen now are a few QR codes. The one on the left will direct you to our support hub page on connectors. The middle one will take you to one of our previous webinars on using participants with invitations reminders. So obviously I showed you that today in conjunction with connectors, but yeah, you don't have to use the connector to use the participants, so that could be a good one to watch. And then if you have got 2 minutes, I'd be grateful if you wouldn't mind filling in the survey, which can be accessed on the right, just to tell us what you thought about today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.